Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Today we have Jurassic Park, the book review. And there's a lot of different places I could take this review. I thought about it. I even agonized over it a little bit. Because there's a lot of differences from this book to the film. And I think that Michael Crichton was, even though he and I obviously have a massive difference in worldview, he was a brilliant man in his own right. You got to give credit where it's due. And a lot of this review is just going to be focused on the character of Ian Malcolm. But I will go over the plot of the book. I don't think I'm going to discuss all the differences between the film and the book. I think that you should know there are several massive ones too. We're not talking subtle differences here. I'll give you an example off the top. Well, maybe I'll just run through the plot of the book quick. And the differences will become apparent there with time. So the book starts on some island in Costa Rica. This family's on vacation. Their little girl is off playing, and she gets bit by this lizard. And the lizard ends up being what's called a compy. And those are about a foot tall little dinosaurs. They're pack hunters, and what their MO is that they have saliva. Their saliva is venomous, and it induces this sort of dreamlike state inside of those who are bitten by it. Now, she survives the attack and is able to smack it. And the animal gets passed around several different labs to multiple people until eventually an inquiry ends up in the hands of Alan Grant. And that's sort of one of the big differences from the film right off the bat, is that it's the intro to the second movie, if you will. Now, I have not seen the new films, and I don't care to, but I have seen the first 3 Jurassic Park films. And from there, the book goes to John Hammond. It does the entire Dodgson thing with Dennis Nedry, where they're talking about betraying InGen, and Biosyn is going to, they want the egg embryos, and that's going to be the big plot driver behind the book. And so what ends up happening is Donald Gennaro, I think it's Gennaro, or it might be Gennaro. I'm going to upset a lot of people with my pronunciation, but it's whatever. I don't care about things like that. So Donald Gennaro is going to this boardroom meeting. He's kind of called. The investors are worried. They want to know what's up with Jurassic Park. John Hammond has been keeping it under wraps. He's not really telling you what the park is. They know it's some kind of zoological place. They know that it's going to have rides, but they're thinking it's some kind of Disney World ripoff. Now, you obviously know this book is famous. I'm not spoiling anything for anyone. That's not the case. So what ends up happening is they all assemble the team. You know, Ian Malcolm comes, John Grant comes, John Grant, Alan Grant comes, Ellie Sattler comes, and then you have, in a scene prior to John Hammond talking to Alan Grant, there's a guy from the Environmental Protection Agency, and he goes over how Alan Grant used to do this sort of consultant work for Jurassic Park. So did Ian Malcolm. So all the people who are being assembled to Jurassic Park are generally prior consultants. Donald Gennaro he's the lawyer for the firm. He's like a 5% investor into InGen or whatever. So anyway, the park is supposed to open in a year, and a lot of people are having cold feet. John Hammond he's this sort of venture capitalist. He's almost like a sort of Dr. Seed character. If you remember Dr. Seed, he's that biotechnology guy who was like, I'm going to become a god. Don't you get in my way, or it'll be war if you do. If you haven't seen that clip, look it up. It's pretty eye-opening. There's a lot of parallels between the God complex in certain men and what nature itself, what creation itself will allow. That's a big theme in this book. But anyway, they end up going to the island, and what happens is initially everything's going fine. Ian Malcolm actually had predicted right from the beginning that this thing would fail, and he has what's called the Malcolm effect. I don't think they mention this in the film at all. It's a big part of the book. It's not really brought up until the last quarter of the book, though. Ian Malcolm is basically the voice of Michael Crichton himself, I would say. And what ends up happening is he's telling you these complex systems, they cannot succeed because, and he talks about chaos theory, fractals. He mentions Kurt Gödel, the famous mathematician who pointed out the limits of logic to be able to be consistent while still proving logic, that sort of stuff. You can look into that guy if you want. It's an interesting theory to read about. So Ian Malcolm is very, very almost, he provises, if you will, almost prophesies that Jurassic Park is bound to fail just from the outset. A lot of the people in Jurassic Park are very arrogant, very haughty. You've got Ed Regis, you've got Dr. Harding, the island's veterinarian. I should mention Ellie Sattler's profession is she's a botanist, essentially. She looks at exotic plants from a paleobotanist is what she's called. And there's a lot of mistakes that are sort of hinting right from the outset that Jurassic Park is not what it appears to be. They didn't take the proper care and precautions. Now, Muldoon is the park warden. This is the most obvious one, and I'll get back to Ian Malcolm. I think it's Robert Muldoon, but Muldoon is the warden. He used to work on a bunch of African sort of safari type stuff. He was a big warden out there, and he points out that the man wanted rocket launchers, heavy weaponry. He wanted military grade weaponry for the animals on the island. And what happens is he gets none of it. And this is something that's going to blow up in their faces later. In the beginning of the book, Ed Regis, who is, I don't remember his exact position. He's he deals with the other firms, like the California firm that deals with Hammond, and then he deals with the Japanese investors. Same with Gennaro. But Ed Regis takes this man who's just been mauled by a raptor to this doctor facility, this local doctor, and he lies to her and says it's a construction accident or whatever, and she's able to discern that that's untrue. And so there's kind of hints and breadcrumbs from the beginning that this is all going to fail. Now, Ian Malcolm, going back to him, we didn't leave him. Going back to Ian Malcolm, using what he's calling chaos theory, fractals, Mandelbrot sets, he essentially says that it is inevitable that Jurassic Park fails. In fact, it could be no other way. And he points out with fractals, and fractals are fascinating. If you have never looked into them, look into Mandelbrot sets, look into the fractals of nature. They're absolutely stunning. They're so beautiful. And to me, I find fractals to be evidence of some kind of creator, some kind of recursive eternity kind of pointing to us that there is an eternity. There is, that's just my thought. Now, you may not feel that way. That's totally fine. Do what you're going to do. But fractals are wondrous. And he's pointing out these repeating patterns that if you look at a leaf, for instance, and you zoom in on part of the pattern at the end of the leaf, you'll find that within that pattern is the bigger pattern of the leaf. It's like take two mirrors and stick them towards each other. That's that kind of thing. And that's an important theme for this book. It's probably the main theme of the book. The chapters are broken up in terms of iterations. And what you have is a quote from Ian Malcolm. Maybe you can see that. You have this quote from Ian Malcolm kind of giving you the motif of that chapter. He says, at the earliest drawings of the fractal curve, few clues to the underlying mathematical structure will be seen. And slowly as the book goes on, these iterations keep increasing and the fractal reveals itself. And it's essentially the disaster of Jurassic Park is unfolding. You can't notice it at first. It seems to be nothing initially. But eventually when it unfolds and you realize, like Ian Malcolm states, this could not have ended any other way. I'll get back into a little bit more of the plot, but I really want to focus on Ian Malcolm. Here's the third iteration. Details emerge more clearly as the fractal curve is redrawn, and it ends up being this. And I'll go back into the seventh iteration here. Increasingly, the mathematics will demand the courage to face its implications, Ian Malcolm. And I believe those quotes are from Ian Malcolm's Malcolm Effect. And I'll get back to that later on in the review when we get there. But what we see is Jurassic Park finishing off the fractal thing in chaos theory. In the movie, Ian Malcolm does a pretty good job. They condense several different bits of dialogue into one 30-second explanation. He basically points out this. What you think are these simple systems are really complex systems. And Ian Malcolm has this notion that, for example, you can calculate the physics of a pool ball and the amount of force needed to knock it to and fro into the other ball to get that ball into the pocket. But then what he points out is there are these factors you're not even looking for that are going to absolutely and catastrophically change the course of that ball and the force that it's been hit with. Take this, for example. Say 3 weeks prior, before you get to the pool game, somebody gouges the table and there's a subtle repair in it. So you factor the physics necessary to get the ball in and you do that perfectly. But unfortunately, it's ever so slight. It's imperceptible to the human eye, perhaps, but it knocks it off course just such that it doesn't go in. And he's talking about that's something more simple. What you're doing, what you guys have done is play God. Go on, you went full Tower of Babel. No, we're going to make the tower. We're going to decide, this biotechnology madness. And he points out this is inevitable because as he says later on in the book, you guys think because you can make an airplane that now you can make the air itself. He goes, you can create a boat, but you can't make the oceans. And he points out he's really talking about the limits of what man is capable of. And John Hammond, who's behind this, by the way, did I say it before? I think I did. He's not this eccentric old man who just wants to put smiles on kids' faces. He's manipulative. He's spiteful. He's mean. He only cares about himself. And the man is blinded by his rapacity. He cannot see beyond the increases. And he's 76, 77 years old in this. Realistically, the man doesn't have that much time to live. And all he cares about is profits. John Hammond reminds me of, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, where this man is boasting that he's going to build more barns to keep his surpluses coming. But then God tells him, you fool, tonight your soul will be required of you. Now who's going to own the things that you have? He reminds me of that character exactly. That's like the type of John Hammond right there. So anyway, they're on the island. Things are going okay at first. They're filled with wonder. A lot of the theories that these people have, the paleontologists and such, are being confirmed. Some of them are being blown away, like they thought dinosaurs were reptiles. And it turns out they're more bird-like. That's the claim that's being made. And you have a bunch of deviations from the book. I'd said that already. But one that I really want to hone in on, at least from a narrative standpoint, is Gennaro. Gennaro is he is an awesome character in this. I have to say, he's really awesome compared to the movie. If you remember on the movie, he dies on the toilet. T-Rex eats him. In this book, the man goes hand to hand with a raptor. He goes hand to hand combat with a velociraptor and survives. Granted, there are factors at play. He doesn't just like go Mike Tyson on it or anything, but he's described as a man in his 30s who's relatively muscular, very fit, takes care of himself. And actually, I think he has the most character growth in this book. He conquers his fear multiple times. He's always at the center of the action. You would not understand that from the film. Basically, what you see in the movie is Ed Regis. Ed Regis abandons the kids. We'll get there. So going back, they're on the island, and suddenly out of nowhere, a helicopter appears, and John Hammond's brought his grandchildren. And Gennaro is furious. He's irate. He's cursing them out. He's incensed. He cannot believe the stupidity of this. And as I pointed out about John Hammond, he says to Gennaro, you know, their parents are getting a divorce. I just wanted to put a smile on their face. John Hammond confesses before he dies at the end of the book in his mind that he brought them there to trick Gennaro into not shutting down the park. He wanted him to see the potential through the eyes of the kids. They're just bargaining chips for him. He actually doesn't care. The character who really cares about the kids in this are, well, almost all the adults show some concern, even if they despise them. Ed Regis and John Hammond despise the kids. Gennaro's furious they're there, but he protects them in places, and so does Alan Grant. But Alan Grant steps in and he takes on this almost father figure. He really is this almost fatherly role. He has no kids of his own. Whereas in the movies, he has that arc where he grows into liking kids. Alan Grant connects with Tim immediately. And in this book, Tim is the older and Lexi, the girl, is younger. So anyway, they go on this tour. There's several deviations from the book, but I'm already, oh my goodness, I'm 17 minutes in. What? I got to hurry this up. And there's so much more to cover. I guess the good news is no one's watching this far, so I can say whatever I want at this point. But anyway, the kids come, they arrive, the tour goes on, and before they get to the tour, Dr. Wu shows up. He's very different as well. He and Ian Malcolm start getting into it and discussing the code that he's been splicing from amphibians to fill in the gaps of the DNA of the dinosaurs. And Ian Malcolm is just going off about chaos theory and fractals and how this is just unwise. Basically, you guys are doing everything. This place is going to fail. All the scientists, this place cannot conceivably fail. We have it all under control. And Ian Malcolm is butting heads with just about everybody in this. He's talking about, you guys have no intelligence. You may have a sense of intelligence, but you don't have any wisdom. You didn't earn any of this. You didn't gain the discipline that comes with attaining a great achievement. You were just handed this, and as a result, you have no gratitude. You have no discipline. You're like a child who's been given his dad's gun, basically. And increasingly, Ian Malcolm is winning over some people, and he's agitating others. Dr. Arnold is in this. If you remember him, Samuel L. Jackson played him. He actually has I think he's one of the most interesting characters in this book, honestly, because he tries to be, well, we'll get there. We'll get there. I want to shut this down in at least 5-6 minutes here, but so they go on the tour. There's several aspects of this book that are not in the film. Characters are different. The battles, if you will, are different. The attempts to get the power back on are different. The attempts to fix Jurassic Park and stop the disaster. In the movie, it's just like a rapid fall. In this, what happens with the Malcolm effect essentially says disaster creeps on you exponentially. And by the time the disaster comes, it's too late. Like, you think it's going to get better, and the moment that it gets better is actually when it gets worse. Now, Dr. Arnold and Ian Malcolm have this, they have it out for each other as Dr. Arnold's trying to fix what Dennis Nedry does. He shuts down the the park or whatever, and then he gets killed by a Dilophosaurus. And that's a grisly scene, man. But the disagreements come. Dr. Arnold, he thinks that I'm going to fix this. It's all going to go fine. But slowly they start losing people. And that's around the time that the storm hits. Dennis Nedry shuts off the power. The phones go out. There's a boat going to the mainland. And on that boat, they see raptors. Raptors are breeding, or the dinosaurs are breeding. They overlook this. Ian Malcolm is kind of smugly looking on like, I told you so. And he just points out, in that report I gave you 5 years ago, I told you this place would fail. No one listened. And there's the philosophical discussion. Like, why am I even reading this book? I'll tell you why. Read this book if you want to hear about the philosophical and ethical discussions that you feel are not being had in the world today, particularly as regards to transhumanism and this biodigital convergence that's going on. And if you want to know more about that, I would read Dr. Douglas Haugen's book, Seen Through the Singularity, or I would go over to the Days of Noah YouTube channel. Both of those guys cover this stuff really well. The philosophies behind it, the hubris behind it, and it's as though Ian Malcolm is saying the same thing. I really love the philosophical discussions that Ian has in this with the other scientists. He's basically the scientist who realizes all that we have is worthless and becoming obsolete because we don't have the healthy respect and fear, essentially. I would call it the fear of God. But man has this inability to accept that he has hard limits on what he can and cannot do and what science can and cannot do. He's like, you think technology is going to fix everything. And this place is going to show you that it doesn't. And Jurassic Park itself is a symbol. To me, it's a symbol of the Tower of Babel. It's a symbol of transhumanism. It's a symbol of man trying to reach heaven another way. He's trying to act like he is the controller when that's not true. There are forces bigger than us. There are things we will not be able to conquer. Hard boundaries, if you will. And the inability of these characters to accept that leads to just systems starting to fail. And then when it seems like they get them back in control, people start dying like mad. And it happens pretty quickly. Dr. Wu ends up being this geneticist. He was driven by the fact that he wanted his name to be the first dinosaur type of guy. He was driven by ambition. Hard ambition is what drove him to do what he did. And you see that with these other characters as well. They all have selfish ambitions, greed, rapacity. There's just vanity. Jurassic Park was vanity. And it was not driven by a pure motive. That's what they lied to themselves and say. And Ian Malcolm really is the character that drives that home. Although Dr. Grant and Ellie Sattler also have those moments. And I mentioned earlier, Gennaro has probably the most character growth. He goes from wanting this place to succeed to absolutely. He even says Dr. Grant and him have this fight later on. And he tells Dr. Grant, I'm trying to take responsibility for what happened. So he represents a repentant sort of soul. He realizes, I've done wrong. I need to make this right. And John Hammond doesn't have that. His arrogance leads to his death. Dr. Wu's arrogance does not lead to his death. It's actually his concern for another human that leads to his death. But it's his hubris that led them to this point. Dr. Arnold dies trying to turn the power back on. And his whole thing was he and Ian Malcolm he basically said the Malcolm effect is short-sighted. It doesn't work the way Dr. Ian Malcolm says. But Ian Malcolm is vindicated every step of the way through this book, through his ability to see these patterns. And he points out that this was bound to fail. It could do nothing else. The philosophical discourse in this book makes it, in my opinion, worth reading today. I know a lot of people are interested in the dinosaurs and the chase scenes, and that's all present here. And it's all great. But really, in my opinion, that's all just a backdrop. That's all a secondary point of consideration. The dialogue between the characters is really where this book shines. And I think I can cut it there. I'm 25 minutes in. None of you are watching this right now. I could say anything I wanted to. What should I say? I won't say anything. Here's what I'll say. I'll say thank you for being with me. I would check this book out, but check it out in the right mindset. Read it as a philosophical cautionary tale about what happens when man decides to play God. And you're seeing that, and you could probably discern why I'm covering this now. I see the same thing today with this sort of transhumanist movement with the metamaterials that are going on, and this, they've got these, there's so much that they're just bringing in, and they're not even considering the damage that it's going to do to people. I mean, there's a big ontological discussion that needs to be had, and people are not having it. A big ethical discussion that's just not being had. But we're just plowing forward with all of this. It's not just AI. It's the Neuralink. It's the smart dust. It's all these other things that people are just starting to admit was real, even though if you read their papers, I mean, they've been writing and discussing this stuff for 50, 60, 70 years. Of course it's real, or at least they want it to be real. So anyway, that's Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park. Ian Malcolm dies at the end. Ed Regis dies. Hammond dies. It's quite interesting. The book is very different from the movie. I'd say it's even more exciting. There's obviously the river raft scene, and there's some interesting and almost comical scenes with the kids interacting with the dinosaurs. I actually like the kids in this book, contrary to what most people say. I thought they represent innocence. Lex she doesn't understand what's going on, so she comes across as annoying. But you have to realize it's a scared 8-year-old girl whose parents are getting divorced. That's her focus. She wants to see her father. She doesn't care about all this, even in the midst of it. But Tim is pretty awesome in this. He actually turns the power back on. So anyway, we are running at, wow, this is probably my longest book review. I feel like there's so much more I could say too and haven't said, but I think we'll cut it here. Thank you for listening. Read Jurassic Park, Michael Crichton. God bless you all. Have a good day.